Hey everyone, today I'm going to create 15 unique cards using the Kendra's Card Challenge number 10. So you can get this from Kendra's website, and I'll put a link below, and it has all of the layouts for the cutting of the 6x6 paper and then the 15 layouts for the different cards. I have selected the A5 Whimsy Birds paper pack from Paper Rose today, and I do not recommend picking A5 paper. For some reason in my mind it was 6x8 and I would have extra left over, but it is narrower than 6 inches, so it was a little bit painful and I had to go the long way when cutting out some of these pieces, so definitely do not recommend it. I love this paper, so recommend the paper pack for sure. But if you do choose to do it this way, I didn't even keep all the cutting in the video because it was a little bit tricky. The first thing that I do is I run through and I pick out the paper and I make sure that I'm really conscious of the directionality of the paper, because quite a lot of the cutting would result in something like those birds being sideways on a card, and so trying to avoid that is really important. The other thing I'm doing is there is this piece of paper that has these sentiments in it, and because I'm trying to not use much more than what I have on hand for these cards today, I'm going to run through and chop these up, and they'll give me a bit of a combination of best wishes and happy birthday and other sentiments. And for me, the reason I love these is the colour palette is exactly the same as the pattern paper pack, so rather than using black sentiments for everything, I can use something that's a bit of a mixture. I do not like having lots of white space on cards. If you've watched any of my videos, you might be used to that. So I often do a matting layer, and today, based on this paper pack, I have chosen bright red and also craft, and I'm actually trying to do bright red every opportunity I get. And honestly, that butterfly card to the left, the red really makes the butterflies on the pattern paper pop. So I was pretty excited to be able to use up some of my red panels. I have a bunch of them in my stash because I had cut them up in advance of Christmas for some Christmas cards, but in the end I decided not to use them. So they've been sitting there in my stash ready to be used, and this is the perfect opportunity. Given that I went through and cut up everything and put all of the pieces on top of the 15 blank cards, this is my next step here. So after I've got everything ready to go and I've picked the papers, chopped them up, I'm running through and I'm lining everything up, adding the matting layer, but then I'm also figuring out which sentiment I'm going to add. And for me, I try and stick to the design where possible. I know Kendra does an amazing job coming up with unique designs, and so I'm trying to stay true to those where I can. But I also don't like very busy or fussy cards, so you will see me simplify. Here with this card, I'm laying out the pattern papers per the cutouts. And in the design, you can see that grey piece, and that is basically saying fill that in with a piece of cardstock or something of your choice. Because I have all these leftovers on the right from my unusual cutting of A5 paper, I've picked a design that matches and I think will highlight the birds and the blue, and then I've included that in the card layout. I will admit that when I did the card challenge this time, I was not looking as closely at the sketches as I normally do, and I think this one's a really good example. So I've done my backing panel, I've got one piece of beautiful pattern paper that's going to go across the centre, and then I'm not looking at the sketch, I'm just trying to figure out how do I keep this one simple without making it too fussy, and I've just literally grabbed a circle sentiment and said, I'm done. Now, the thing that's important to understand is at this point, I haven't done the matting layers. So if I'm deciding that I'm going to mat to highlight some of these pattern papers, I do that just before I glue everything together. So that will be later in the video. It's a bit of a long video today, but I decided to keep in the choices of paper, how I pulled together the design itself, and then the gluing together. And when I'm putting it together, I do change my mind and I do add a few more tips and tricks to my commentary. So I'll hope you will watch all the way through to the end. All right, with that one, you would notice that I had the pinky red pattern paper, so I just swapped it out for yellow, just because that lines up better with the red background. Okay, this one was interesting. The intent of the card layout is that you actually cut through the side of the pattern paper and then you fold it back so that you highlight the back of the pattern paper. Most pattern papers, especially 6x6, are double-sided. For me, it wasn't, so I had to make a different choice and I've added some extra paper on top of that design and completely changed it, basically. But I feel like the sketches are a guide, and then you can work from those to do what makes sense. Now with this one, it did feel like there was a lot of the pink and not much else going on. And I really, really love these flowers and this strip of navy. So I've added this to the middle instead of the diamond. And then all I need to do is pick a sentiment that I think I'll match and then figure out a place to put it. Apologies for my voice, by the way. I've been battling a cold or the flu or a sore throat or a cough, a mixture of all of the above. But I still wanted to get my videos out. So it's a little froggy and sounds a little strange, but hopefully it's not too bad. All right, this one has the standard, add a few banners with some of the smaller pieces of the pattern paper. And again, I'm loving my little stash to the right just there, because when I had something that really wouldn't look very good for that layout, I was able to just switch it for a different color and then move on. These 3 cards here are very, very cute. And when I cut them, I did have the bigger panel, and then I put all 3 papers on top of each other. And then I cut through those the 2 cuts, so that when I switched all these papers around and made the 3 cards, I was able to ensure that they would all line up perfectly. I didn't trust myself to cut them perfectly if I did them one sheet at a time. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, on to this one. This is such a unique card layout, so kudos to Kendra for coming up with this one. It just happened that I had some quite floral and pale patterns for this, and so when I was working through pulling it together, it just felt like it needed a little bit of interest on top of it beyond just a bit of a banner. And so here we go. I managed to use that other leftover piece of that navy blue strip. And I do think that adds just a little bit more interest on top of that card design. This layout uses these 3 strips of pattern paper, and it's normally one of those ones where you've got to be really careful about the size of the design because it's such a small, narrow piece. The piece that I was concerned about was the birds, but you can see complete birds in the strip, so I figured that it would work just fine, and coincidentally the 3 pieces of pattern paper match really well. So I will line those with some matting down the track, but for the moment I think that worked really nicely just with a craft background. We're now up to card 15. This one has just a giant strip of beautiful bird paper through the middle, and I chose just to add a simple circle sentiment to finish off the card layout. I'm now up to the part of the video where I'm finishing everything off, and I have tried to trim this down a little bit, but you will see me gluing and using my ATG and lining things up. For this card, the pattern paper is so gorgeous, but basically this layout I think could be used repeatedly. If you were trying to smash a paper pad, you could create something super basic like that, especially with the bright pop of color behind, and I think that would work really, really, really nicely for a lot of variety of occasions. All right, card number 2. For this one, I just had to be careful that when I was lining up this piece of pattern paper that it went corner to corner, just so that there was no strange edges. And then I've trimmed this down to make sure that there is nothing hanging off the edge. And I do end up with my nice 1/4 inch white border around the edge. I do not have oval dies, and I'm not really a huge fan of ovals, so you will find that I rely heavily on circles or even just substituting them out for a rectangle. Again, I do feel like the approach with these cards is use it as a guideline and make it your own. So this one here, I'm just chopping out a little bit of the paper to put behind the circle so I don't have a noticeable dip. And then I'm going to glue this on and it will complete card number 2. If you're enjoying the video, it would be fantastic if you could hit the like button. It really does help YouTube decide which videos to share to more viewers. So thank you for that. All right, for card number 3, I did decide to do a little bit of matting here. And I decided that creating the mat first, well, attaching one of the pieces, and then creating the mat in the correct size before I add the other one at the other end, meant that I would have everything lined up correctly and I wouldn't need to fiddle with it once I was attaching it to the backing panel. For the other components of the card, I also made sure that I layered them in white. I've just got scraps of white that are sitting in a bit of a pile just beside my desk, and I just grabbed something that looks relatively correct and then I add the pattern paper and then I trim it down manually. For this one, I was able to actually put the sentiment onto the same piece, which was super handy. So I was able to cut them both down, and then again, it just is the final compilation of gluing everything together to finalize the card. I just noticed that I actually have not gone through and done any of the embellishments on my cards today. So often there will be little black dots or circles or extra embellishment suggestions. And on this one, you can see in the top right hand corner, there's those 3 dots down the right hand side. I have not included those, and I could potentially do it after the fact, but I tend to not gravitate towards those items. So you will often find my cards a lot simpler and plainer than the original design. So this is finalization of card 3. Apologies for the photos that I have at the end of the cards. It's just that I forgot to leave them there so I could do a screen capture. So you will see my hands in all kinds of weird angles. That was me just trying to capture what I could to zoom in a little so that you had a better view of each of the completed cards. So again, apologies for that. That was just a rookie mistake when I was recording. All right, so for this one, I've added the 3 panels. I really think this is a card that I could make again in bulk. I love cutting down pieces of paper to decent sized pieces that add some interest to a card, but not so small that it takes forever to do the cutting and forever to actually put the card together. This looks like a really nice balance with, it almost looks like 1/3, 2/3, and then a full piece. I'm not sure, but that was card number 4. For card number 5, this is the one where I did not look at the card layout when I was creating it. So you can see here I've added the white matting layer. I could have tried to find something a little bit more exciting to jazz up my circle sentiment, and I probably should have put it on the card layout exactly where it's intended for the design. And I should have, but I honestly just was not looking at it correctly. So this is the finalization of card number 5. For card number 6, again, I've got my bright red background, and this was the one where I swapped out one of the pieces of pattern paper, and I do think this is one that I would create again. I think this would be fantastic for using up. I have a box full of, I think they're about 1.5 inch scraps. Some of them are 6 inches long and some of them are 12 inches long. They were from a project, I'm going to say 5 or 10 years ago, like a long time ago. But the pattern papers are absolutely beautiful. And I've done quite a few videos, if you look through my video catalogue, on how to use up strips like that. But this one is an interesting one. I like how it has a couple of small pieces of pattern paper on top and that circle sentiment, because it just breaks up the design a little bit. Again, because I don't like anything that's too fussy, I think this is probably as complex enough for me as I would probably use, especially when it comes to pattern paper. You can see here I'm tucking this underneath because I've changed the shape of the second piece of paper, but it all works, and by putting some little bits of cardstock behind and keeping everything nice and flat, the card itself, even though it has quite a few layers on it, is very stable, and I don't think it would get squashed if I was to use this card to mail it. Card number 7 is a super simple design, not because Kendra created it that way, but this is the one where you're supposed to fold back the pattern paper to expose the one on the back. I'm using single-sided paper today, so I wasn't able to do that. I guess I could have folded it back and had the white showing, but in the end I just added a spare piece of this beautiful butterfly paper and a happy birthday sentiment, and then I was all set. All right, for card number 8, again, just compiling with the triangles and then the beautiful pattern paper strip that came from the sentiment page. You might notice that on the top left-hand side, you are seeing the components of the card that I previously compiled. This is because when I went through the first time and created the big pile of cards with all of the elements that were ready to be assembled, I did not go through and shuffle them back through 1 through 15. Instead, I actually completed the cards in reverse order from 15 through 1, and then through the magic of editing, I have put them back in order for you. So I thought it might be a little confusing if I did them in reverse, and I was unsure if I should do the decision making and the pulling together of the card components and then the assembly together, but I decided to do it this way because this is the way I do it in real life, and I know that people often like hints and tips on how other people do their card making. So even though this is significantly trimmed down and I've edited out all of the all of the bits where I was trimming things down and doing really boring activities as much as possible, I have assembled it back in the order that makes sense for the viewer. All right, here I had a couple of the sentiments that were a little bit blurry, and so what I decided to do is glue a few of them together to turn that into a bit more of a, it's almost like a chipboard element, and it just gives it a little bit more weight, and based on this layout and the design, I thought this card could handle it. And it means that the leftovers that I have for the cards that, or for the sentiments rather, that aren't going to be usable on their own, I have used them up rather than created some scraps. I find this one to be a really pretty layout, but it's probably not one that I would bulk create. I'm not really a huge fan of lots of banners, and then I do find them really fiddly to cut and create. They are a great way to use up lots of little scraps though, so if you love using all the leftover small pieces, maybe that would be a good design to work for you. For card 10, 11 and 12, these are all exactly the same, so I'm only showing you how I've put one of them together. They just have the pattern paper in a slightly different position, and I will admit that I did shuffle around the paper when I was cutting them up to make sure I had a really good match for these three, because if I'd had these blue and yellow birds with a little bit of green and then I'd thrown in some pink, I really think that would have looked really strange on the design. So there is a little bit of planning involved to make sure that this one works out really well. But it is a great way to get full coverage of pattern paper if that's a look that you enjoy. And here we go, more of these circle sentiments. I do have a video where I bulk create circle sentiments, and if you haven't checked it out, it is one of my hints and tips videos. I will put a link up above so that you can check it out, and there will be a link below in the description as well. Moving on to card 13, this is the one that has loads and loads of triangles. And when I was putting this together, I tried to line everything up as best I could. And while I lined up the pattern papers well, I didn't line them up centered on the actual card front. So in the end, after I'd glued all of these on, I actually trimmed the card front off the card itself, and then I laid it on a fresh card base. I probably should have thought this through a little bit and maybe compiled these on a scrap piece of paper. I could have even used something really simple like even printer paper, and then I could have cut that out and put it on the card front as one piece. But I did just hope that I would get it right, and I didn't. It was a lot to line up, and I decided that lining up the paper so that it was correctly aligned to itself rather than the card front with no gaps was better, especially since it was super easy just to cut this off the front and then use a brand new fresh card base, and problem solved. In card making, things do not always go correctly or according to plan, and it is perfectly fine to pivot, is what I tell myself. So this little element, again, I've just been matting all of this in white. I do have a video where I created a card sketch without doing white matting, and I think with the right paper pack you can do it, and it does save you a ton of time. So maybe I'll try and create another video with that approach moving forward. Okay, on to card number 14. I did not really have any elements to really jazz up this card like those hearts in the original sketch. Again, simplified. If you're watching my videos, you'll be noticing a theme. I really do just keep things nice and simple. But I have matted these ones on white, and I'm not even worried about the spacing. I'm just worried about being consistent between the three panels. And then I'm just lining them all up. I do it upside down because if I make a mistake, it's easier to trim from the bottom of the card than the top. And then literally a little bit more of my Belly Art liquid glue. My absolute favorite glue, by the way. I feel like I've tried them all, and this is by far my favorite. And throwing on my thank you sentiment, and that is card number 14. I would love to know, what is your favorite card sketch out of the collection? Maybe what's your favorite card sketch, and then what's the favorite card that you saw me create today? It may be different. You may like one of the adjustments that I've done to one of the card designs. You never know. If you're looking to do a bit of a binge watch, I do have playlists with different types of cards all together in one place, so you might want to check those out. Have a great day.